Bold has been an ongoing series supporting creative entrepreneurship at ArtCenter since 2014. Having Kickstarter and Supplyframe on board for this particular part of the Bold program is just very fortunate.
Yeah, I think something that Robbie modestly left out was that he came to me and Katie a couple months ago and said, I have this idea. I think you guys would have really interesting perspectives and share with our community really valuable points about bringing a product to market. And so he was the mastermind of this whole thing. So if we could just give him a round of applause, that'd be really great. Yeah. All right, so before I ask each of our panelists to tell us a little bit about themselves, I guess I'll tell you who I am. I'm Clarissa. I handle West Coast outreach for design and technology at Kickstarter, which just means that I hop up and down the coast doing stuff like this. This is like my everyday, which is really exciting. And I talk to some of our most highly funded projects or maybe culturally significant category projects that are, maybe bringing a new VR headset to life or sending a satellite into space that can be propelled by a Mylar sail, just crazy things like that. And with that, I'll go ahead and let you guys go down the row and tell us a little bit about yourselves.
I'm Chiara Ferrari. I'm from Italy, as you can probably guess by my accent. And I'm a designer, as in furniture and interiors, a maker, as in making stuff, and an educator as a teacher at ArtCenter, College of Design.
My name's Tod Kurt. I run a small company called Thingam that has been around for probably about 11 years now. And originally we made little electronic prototyping boards for the Arduino hobbyist electronics platform, if you've ever heard that. In the last couple of years, I've had a USB LED light, like a little notification light for your computer to notify you if you have, like, say, new email or if your computer's running too hot or something. And we had a couple of Kickstarters for that with a version 1, which
Ta-da.
is with that,
Yeah.
and a version 2, which is has a much better industrial design. The industrial design of this was done by another ArtCenter alum, Abraham Peters. I don't know if you want to know him, but I'm not a designer. I'm an electrical engineer from Caltech, and so it was very handy to have someone who actually knows CAD at the time, because I didn't really know CAD that much back then. But we sold probably 40,000 of these things so far, and I also co-founded a hackerspace in Culver City called CrashSpace, this is one of the little art pieces that we made for a CrashSpace art show. And yeah, it's me, basically.
Yeah, well,
I
have one more thing about you.
Also, I have a little bit of information about the Design Lab because I was a Design Lab resident here in the first half of 2017. So,
yeah, so you built something in this space, which is pretty awesome.
I was trying to build aesthetic art lamps it was more of an artistic exercise for me than an engineering one, which was sort of hard for me. But yeah.
Nice, okay.
Hey there, I'm Jessie Genet, and I went to ArtCenter for product design, and I launched a Kickstarter campaign way back in 2009, and then a second campaign in 2012 that raised over $250,000. So we had really fun Kickstarter success. I ran that company for 4 years, and then I learned a lot about packaging and supply chain running that first business. So I started a second business 3 years ago called Lumi.com, and we do packaging supply chain for direct-to-consumer companies. So that's Field Skillet. That's another Kickstarter project that we made the packaging for. Also other brands you might know in LA like MeUndies, Parachute Home, FabFitFun. We do all of their packaging as well now.
And that's you.
Oh yeah, that's all right. Thanks, guys. All right, yeah. I have a YouTube show. I didn't know why everyone's laughing. I was like, those are just the brand names. I do a show on YouTube called Shipping Things, and it's all about shipping things. It's very on the nose. The genre is slapstick supply chain.
Nice. All right.
Hi guys, what's up? My name's Spencer Nicosi. I'm a graduate of ArtCenter College of Design. I studied industrial design there. And when I was a student, I decided to make myself a waterproof backpack. And I decided to launch a collection of bags at my senior show. And when I did, it was kind of like a risky thing at the time. No one had ever really done that before. And it took off. And I started by building our own factory in downtown LA, and we've been doing that ever since, almost 9 years now. We had a factory in downtown. We moved to Silver Lake. We opened a store in Silver Lake. Now ran that for 3 years, and we outgrew the space. Now we're in Atwater Village. We have a 7,000 square foot design and manufacturing space, and we build everything in-house every single day, and we ship product every single day. And we make music there, we make films there, and we make all sorts of kind of special projects that we don't really advertise, but our core is making travel bags and accessories out of leather.
Awesome. And so we're going to have a pretty open conversation. So we're not going to keep going down the line like we just did. And I would love to start by asking the panel if you have any design influences or maybe perspectives that you bring to your work. I would love to hear about that. Anyone want to take it?
Just perspectives. I don't know if this is a design influence, but I grew up in Detroit, and I think that to me, like when people ask me about why I'm doing packaging now, or like we don't design the packaging, we're really like the supply chain aspect of it, and they're like, it just seems very non-creative to them. But to me, the like manufacturing and creativity are hand in hand. Like how things are made is like the same thing as like trying to birth a product out into the world. So it's partially maybe from being from Detroit and seeing a lot of that stuff, but it's also probably from other things as well.
Yeah, just to add to that, one of the things I really like, because I don't really have like I do not have a culture design sense, but I really like created things that use the manufacturing techniques to their advantage. So like using materials that can act as a living spring, finding ways of making packaging that don't require adhesives, things like that, that like sort of use the technologies rather than try to force your idea into the technologies.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of just building things. Like when we were students in school, we were always like building, you know, I had an idea for an MPC, and like I decided to 3D print it, and I wanted it to work, but it didn't work because I didn't have electrical engineering and I couldn't figure out how to make the music. So we had to make an animation to like fake it working. And so being able to like sketch an idea, prototype it, see it in person, test it, see how it failed and how to make it better is like, for me, has been like the most kind of gratifying and fulfilling experience. And just as kind of like a day-to-day, if you're not like building and seeing your ideas come to life and being able to actually use them and test them, then it's not really, for me, like it's not real. You know, I need to see and test and kind of improve upon the sketches, and then also sketching too. Like I carry around like a moleskin with me. I literally have like 3 weekender bags filled with sketches, like you know, just full of ideas that are terrible. A few of them are good, and then you take the good ideas and then you make those happen. And that's kind of like one of the, just a basic kind of starting point for influence of design, kind of, you know, perspective.
I get inspired by everything that I don't actually do. So first of all, art for me, partially for my family background, art is a big inspiration. Sometimes it's like form or color or a composition. While looking at an exhibition. So these are some of the elements that really inspire my work. But for me, designing means like always starting from people. Mm-hmm. So the concept of empathy. So if I design a chair, I always look like how people sit. Mm-hmm. And ultimately what we do, I think, as rather packaging or different types of goods, they need to be for people. So. Mm-hmm. For me, it's really important to understand what people seek for, what they're looking for these days.
Yeah.
Especially in cultural evolution.
Yeah. Do you guys have a defined design process, like, or do you just sort of like hack things together and work on your inspiration, or do you have a method in mind?
I mean, I make bags, right? Sorry to interrupt, but like, there's only so many ways you can make a bag, right? So you sketch an idea, you know, refine that idea, then you build a pattern, then you take material, you cut it, you sew it together, and you're pretty much done with it. Put it in a box and like ship it. So for me, like that's kind of a simplified like process of how we do things. Although there's like a lot of other really cool things that are happening right now with like 3D printing and different types of manufacturing methods that haven't been used in that space that I'm kind of like looking into. So for me, that's kind of like a fun way to look at taking something that you've kind of done, like maybe like packaging. You kind of see it in a certain way and trying to see how you can evolve it in some way.
But you have design constraints, right? Like this is this is to be a bag for this purpose or that purpose. And like, do you have dimensional constraints for that, or?
Yeah, I mean, just going on an airline, for example, you can't, flying overhead and coach. That's like one of the most important things. And if you don't have that figured out, then you kind of failed. So yeah, there's so many constraints and so many different things that people are carrying, and I just want to figure out the way to help people travel better.
I think there's something really in my world, that there's something really interesting about like where function meets design. Usually we're working with design teams in a brand, in a company who's like deciding what that packaging is going to look like. But we, since I come from a design background, we find like the gentlest ways possible of reminding them, like, even if it's beautiful, like it's not beautiful if it arrives smashed, right? Like the beauty may be lost if it arrives smashed, or if it's a certain form factor that is really commonly lost in the mail because it doesn't fit in the sorting slot and whatever. So there's an interesting element of that I get to do in my job, which I really enjoy because it's like helping designs come to life.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really curious, because you guys work in so many different spaces, are there any materials that you're particularly interested in right now for your work, or anything that you're trying to explore?
Corian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been using Corian. I actually discovered that material many years ago when I was working for Zaha did. And it was actually used in a very organic way. And then throughout my path, I kind of like found a very minimal way of designing things. But still, I love to challenge the use of material, because currently, still as of today, even if the material has been around for many, many years, is only used for kitchen counters, so in sheets rather than thermoformed. And I've been doing like lighting, and I'm looking into do more furniture with Corian, especially for really challenging the material to different uses than just like kitchen and bathroom, basically.
Yeah. What do you love about it? You said it like chocolate whenever you said it.
It's beyond chocolate. It's like it's a disease, actually, right? It's a Korean disease. So it's basically, I think it's the touch, the feel, the texture of it, the translucency. So combined with light and a good thickness is actually a very interesting material in terms of like light diffusion, and it's undiscovered. So. It's kind of like a lot of possibilities out there. Yeah,
that's really exciting. Yeah, and I know, Todd, you're working with some like LEDs that are different than we normally would use, or
but before that, one of the things that has frustrated me a lot is that in consumer electronics, if you want to use something interesting like Corian or ceramics or wood in consumer electronics, it's hard. It's like the industries don't overlap much, and so if you want to find someone who can integrate your little electronic gizmo into a nicely fine CNC wood thing, that's much harder than getting some similarly CNC metal or plastic thermoset thing. But yeah, for LEDs, to go to you, everyone's familiar with RGB LEDs. There's single color LEDs back there, but there's also the RGB LEDs that can be any color by mixing red, green, and blue in some percentage. But there are also LEDs that have, instead of RGB, they have 3 different color temperatures of white. And so now you can have tunable color temperature of LED, which is pretty cool to me. And I've been experimenting with making lamps out of that to varying success.
This one's kind of geeky, but how many? Like, I'm not going to do a show of hands. I'm sure everyone's familiar with rubber stamps, but most rubber stamps these days are actually made out of photopolymer. There's a couple different processes, but like photopolymer is like how you can make the base of the rubber stamp that makes your impression. And photopolymer is like fascinating, and it's essentially like a photographic process. And what's interesting, fun fact, the same like photopolymer that you use to make a rubber stamp that's like wee big is you also use to make the plates that make a massive box. It's just a giant rubber stamp mounted on a cylinder. So I've been really fascinated by photopolymer, and I've been doing some like art and stuff as well on the side with like weird photopolymers. Okay, that's mine.
That's awesome. Do you end up using it for like Lumi work or just your own artwork? Or?
Well, I use it every day. I mean, like when, literally when you make, if you need to print 1 million boxes, it starts by someone like pouring photopolymer out and making a plate for you. So I just find it really fascinating that it can perform at that level and also like be a rubber stamp. I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many materials that are in process that are really inspiring. There's a company right now called Mark Forge. I don't know if you guys have heard of them. They're a 3D printing company that prints 3D parts out of like glass-filled nylon, out of like carbon fiber, out of Kevlar. And what's really interesting is I'm trying to like buy one of those machines right now, but they're really expensive. So I'm saving up for it. But what you can do with that is you can make parts that are things that you can put in your car, or things you can put on your motorcycle, or things that are pretty much indestructible. Instead of like making a 3D part that just is for size and shape and just kind of like a functional a non-functional prototype, you can 3D print parts that you don't need tooling for, which is like a huge advancement. And if what I want to do is be able to incorporate those types of things into our products, or just in general, just to make stuff, to modify my life.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, some of the best products I've seen are people making things that they want themselves.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
there's so many times I go on a snowboarding trip, or I'm like biking or something. I'm like, all right, this thing doesn't work. This snowboard, like getting in and out of the snowboard is not easy, and I want to be able to like go on my computer, like come up with a design, print it out, and then go test it and go ride with it, or go play baseball with a handle on a bat that, or whatever the idea is. I want to be able to do it because I want to be out of the office and playing and having fun and not working all the time.
Yeah, no, it's R&D, right?
Yeah, it's R&D, exactly. It should be really fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. So this conversation is going to evolve into a talk about sort of launching your first product. And I thought a really fun way to start is, do you guys remember the first thing that you made and shared with someone else, like a product? And what have you learned since that very first like amateur attempt, and what you know now after making so many design objects or so many products that you've put in the hands of people? Is there a nugget of wisdom anyone can share?
I can go. In I think it was 6th or 7th grade, I made a design for a product called a bind board. And me and my friends, we took webbing and we literally screwed it to the top of our skateboard so we can like put our feet in and like be attached to the board. And we sold them to each other for like $15 or whatever. And we had a group of kids in the valley in outside of Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley, like with helmets on and pads, like going down like our streets and doing like jumping off of stairs without having to know how to do that. You know what I mean? You just literally jumped off and your board was on your feet. And so I have like a book of like photos that we took with, it wasn't safe at all, but we did it. And that was like, the idea of just going and doing something was kind of fun at that time. And my parents were artists, so they're like supporting it. And, essentially what we're doing now is the same thing. We're kind of like, what do we need? What doesn't exist? Okay, I'm going to build that and then use it.
Yeah.
So for, I've been doing that ever since I was a little kid.
So you learned nothing.
No, I mean, I guess like what I learned is if you build something that you love and that you're passionate about, there is an audience for it. Yeah. I think. Obviously that doesn't really apply to everything, but if you're building things that other people have already built, or you're designing something that someone else has already designed, it's like, do something else. Try to do something that's new and fresh and that kind of speaks to a problem. That's hopefully designing. I think designing problems is like a huge opportunity. There's it's never going to end. There's going to be problems for the rest of our lives, for eternity. So if you're constantly looking at ways to innovate or change something or use a different material for a different process or kind of combine different manufacturing processes or materials to solve a problem, then that's where it's at.
Yeah, yeah. And Jesse, you've had like a really interesting thread run through that brought you to what you do today. Can you sort of like lead us through that? Or?
Yeah, my memory was I started a t-shirt company, like printing t-shirts in my parents' basement when I was a teenager. And that was the first thing I was like, hey guys, like I started a t-shirt company when I was like 15 or something. And it sounds sort of unrelated, but that I got into printing processes and thinking about how I could print t-shirts even better. And that led me to researching printing processes, fabric dye. It relates all the way to when I decide like, I'm gonna make it so you can photo print t-shirts. And that ends up being the product I launch on Kickstarter, all because I thought, let's make a better t-shirt printing process for myself. So the other thing that I think is fascinating between like, well, for me, it's like from my 2009 campaign, I was just making product printed with the dye for other people. And then by 2012, I realized the more powerful thing would be to take the dye I'd created and let everyone use it. So that changing point for me of like, oh, this is for me. Like I created a tool for myself to actually, maybe I just created a tool and everyone could use it. And that's the difference maybe between raising $13,000 and $260,000. Like you know, I mean, there's also time in between, but I think it does beg the question, like sometimes we get more out of our ideas by sharing them. And then by running my first company, that dye business for 4 years, I realized it's almost again, like I internalized my hardest aspects of like, I wish my packaging was better. I wish it was easier to source and manage into like, oh, maybe I can do that for other people. So I think it is a thread, and it all does relate back to printing processes, even though it seems esoteric, but yeah.
No, you're still building tools for people.
Yeah,
right?
building tools, making tools instead of products is what I refer to it as. Like, not that I don't love products. I literally love products, and I went to product design school. But my point is, like, to me, I've just spent more time now making tools instead. You could beg the question if they're the same thing, but it's just a mindset. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you guys remember what you first made? Yeah?
Yeah, I was about maybe 11, and I did my first lamp made out of metal mesh in my dad's workshop, and he actually launched it, but out of the window because he didn't want it in his workshop. So it was a kind of like, but anyway, aside from that, like what I've really learned throughout my career is that it's very, very important to keep the core of the concept of a product. So when we have an idea and we sketch it, and then throughout the completion is a lot of phases. Sometimes it's like cost or manufacturing limitations or other factors that comes in the way. And you have to compromise as a designer. You have to compromise something. You cannot have everything, just like in life, by the way. And I think it's really important to keep the core of your concept throughout. So fight for that. You know, if the core is to use like very thin material, then fight for that. If the core of your concept is a certain way of using the product, I think that is worth fighting for, and it's essential.
Yeah, I actually have a sort of a follow-up question. How do you drive down to what the core of the concept is? Do you have any type of process for that, or you just sort of get inspired by something and go from there?
It really depends from the project, actually, the scale and the type of project. And I think depending on that, you know from the beginning what the project is about.
Cool.
You know it.
Yeah.
It's in you. It's on the table as well.
Yeah. You can't escape it after that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Do you remember what you first hacked together?
I don't know. I've been building little electronic things since I was like 7 years old, and most of them would blow up. But is it things that would eventually turn into a product?
Yeah, it'd be great if it were something that you. I mean, how early did you build something to give something away? Was it the Kickstarter campaign or?
No, I mean it was probably, in mid 2000s. I did a bunch of hacking for the little Roomba robot
Oh, cool.
Little vacuum cleaner. I don't know if you guys remember that. But they did an amazing thing is that they enabled access to its serial port so you could control it. And I made a bunch of ways to control it with your computer, and that turned into a book. But before then, I was posting those schematics and circuits on Hackaday back before Supplyframe owned Hackaday, and so that was kind of the first thing where people were saying like, hey, can I buy one of these? I was like, well, no, here's the plans on how to make it. So.
Yeah, and that runs through your work as well, like sort of showing the process, showing how people could do it themselves if they wanted to.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in open source. I don't know if you've heard of this term before. In the hardware realm, it's a little bit harder because there are many different design files for a hardware project. With software, it's like, oh, here's the code. But with hardware, there's the electronic design files. There's maybe the CAD of the enclosure. There's the packaging, perhaps, if that's important. And so what does it mean for a product to be open hardware? It's like, well, it kind of depends. And but I'm a believer in making everything open hardware, making everything open source, and that's troublesome because if you're like, oh, but my thing's gonna get copied, it's like, well, that's kind of flattery. If your thing is so good that people want to copy it, that's great. And so my belief is that, well, if it starts getting copied, then make something different, make something better, make a new version maybe that.
Or sell a service on top of that.
Well, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of this whole like, oh, let's put everything in the cloud and you got to pay a subscription fee to make the thing work, because
no maintenance services for you. No. All right, okay, good to know. Yeah.
So if you want one of my little Blink 1 LEDs, there's no service you need to subscribe to. It's just a physical thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. One thing that we were talking about earlier was how important communities are to building product, and there are a lot of support structures that you guys draw from, including the Supplyframe Design Lab. ArtCenter has an amazing community where you can bounce ideas off people. There are accelerators, incubators, programs, all these things. Can you guys tell us a little bit about the communities that you drew from and gave you some strength?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously I was at Kickstarter. I was at ArtCenter when we did our first Kickstarter, and I think both of those communities made a huge impact. I think that the idea of community is really fascinating. It's easy for us to sometimes brush past it in the course of growing a business and making a product. And it's like at your own peril to brush past it, because it's like usually where a lot of the power lies in your idea. And that is actually, I had a really interesting insight that I think relates to this, that relates to like why I shut down my first company and started a new one. In 2014, I was at the height of selling my Ink Dye product, which we launched on Kickstarter, but something felt like off. Like it felt like I felt like I had done everything I could with it, and I just couldn't imagine, even though it was an amazing year, I just, for some reason, didn't imagine myself doing it the next year. And I was like, I wonder why I feel this way, and I was looking for different reasons, and I went to like our hello at, Ink Dye inbox and like looked at all of our emails, and I'm like super spreadsheety and weird, especially for a designer, but anyway, I like did this analysis on our emails about like what people are emailing us about, and I noticed that over half of our emails were questions that had nothing to do with our product. People were asking us, who did your packaging? How do you do Kickstarter? Like your emails are so pretty. Who does your photography? They were just asking us everything except like, hey, I want some Ink Dye. Like they were like asking us everything else. So I think that there was a part of me that was like, I should listen to these people. They're emailing me every day, and what they really want to know is how to grow a business and how to do packaging and supply chain, and that's like the direction I went. But anyway, it's my little story of like tapping into that and listening. Sometimes where the more powerful idea is, even though I was spending every day on Ink Dye.
Yeah, so beyond your mentors and your ArtCenter community, you actually look to your own customers. Yeah,
the people can. Yeah, like sometimes the community is like whoever is like willing to interact with you every day, right? Like we all have these like aspirational communities where it's like I'm part of this and I'm part of that, but then like you get back to your office and like who is emailing you? Who are you talking to every day? Like they might be your real community, and like I say that in a good way. Usually, like they might be some really cool people. Like you might be overlooking them to like talk to someone who you think is more cooler or interesting, and that could be a mistake. Yeah.
And do any of you have like mentor stories or anything that you can share to help us figure out how we get help for launching a product? Or
I mean, I have an interesting story. So kind of similar to Jesse, we have a lot of customers, and over the years, we've had a lot more customers. And when I first started, I got an email from someone saying, "Hey, do you mind if Steve at Apple gives you feedback on your product?" And I was like, some guy from the like Genius Bar or something that like wanted to like, it wasn't Steve Jobs, but basically it was like one of the VPs of Apple owned all of our products, and he sent me in a keynote presentation with all of our pictures of all of our products and how to make them better. Essentially, it was like 14 pages long. And there was these like engineering call outs, like you can cook your fabric at 300 degrees Celsius for 4 hours to reduce the amount of off-gassing in the fabric, and you can use this coating on this material. And I was like, whoa. And there was no information about who this guy was. It was just kind of like, it was like this ominous person. And so I made a backpack the next day for free, and I sent it to him. I said, "Hey, I don't know who you are, but you're like super cool. Like, thank you so much for the advice. No one's ever done that." Mm-hmm. And I've been friends with this guy ever since, and he's been one of the most inspiring figures in my life. And I'm friends with his family and his kids, and he's invited me to go to trips and check out these like exotic locations and look at different things. And so it's just kind of like, you know, you never know who your customers are. You never know what advice people are giving you, and if you like follow that, like where it can lead you. I also get a lot of customers telling me to do things about to make products that I don't want to make or I don't really care about. But if you're able to look at all the stuff and kind of learn from it as much as possible, it's only going to help you. You know.
Yeah.
Totally. And I'd say if you don't have a Kickstarter, because these are like, oh, we already have customers and we're listening to them. I found it's very useful to back Kickstarters of products that you like or maybe kind of want to emulate and be part of their communities, because there's a lot of discussion usually going on these things, and the Kickstarter community in general is super great. Like everyone kind of just wants to see the thing happen. They don't really, like a lot of them don't think of it as Amazon. Some of them do, but most don't. Most of them are like, oh, we want to work with you together, and so they'll be offering suggestions, and you're in there in the mix listening to this other thing that's kind of like your thing maybe, but not quite. That's really
interesting. Yeah.
My work is actually less community based because I do a lot of like custom furniture and interior design specifically for like a certain client. So I would call my community like the big amount of people that I really trust and I'm friendly with that are also designers. And I'm thankful to them because I pester them all the time with my design to ask an opinion. And in terms of mentor, for me, I never had a mentor, but I've been lucky enough to work for many different design studios across the world, both in Italy, in London, and in LA. And I've learned a lot by just looking at how these people work and what is their focus every day. And that allowed me to find then my own path. And every day for me, like my own founding or mentorship is my passion and my curiosity for things in life in general.
Yeah. How do you work with a single client? Is that an interesting...
It can be very painful. You don't sleep at night necessarily, but it's equally interesting because it's a very personal process, you know, especially if you need to design, I don't know, like something for their house.
Yeah.
So it's not really about my taste sometimes, it's about their words. And I found that quite challenging, equally interesting, especially because it's using somehow like what I've learned in my career to actually do something that really works for them and is really special for them.
Yeah, and Spencer, I feel like you thought you were designing for your friends in your larger community, but you were designing for Steve. He was your client.
Kind of. Honestly, it's like when you have someone in your life that's at that level and they've done kind of the biggest things in the world, you have to listen to them. You know, you have to like respect that. Yeah. And I've gotten a good friend out of it, so I'm really stoked. But I've also been given a lot of kind of harsh criticism too, which you learn how to like you learn how to like get stronger skin because of it. Because like he did, I have a lot of mentors, a lot of people who I look up to a lot of people who I can have real open, honest conversations with, and some of the most talented people are the harshest, and you gotta like learn to be shot down all the time, and it's only gonna make you better, you know, if you can learn from, grow from that. You know?
Yeah. Did your dad's throwing your lamp out the window make you feel something
Sure,
better?
yeah. Amazing experience, yeah. But I mean, as of today, I actually still, I've done so many custom pieces that I actually wanna, I keep that as of today, but I really am interested to actually design for a bigger community, where really everyone can enjoy, you know, what I design, you know, and it should be more accessible as well, I think.
Yeah, that actually leads perfectly into my next question, which is, how do you know when something's ready for your client or your community? Like, how do you know when the time is right to launch a product? Have you figured that out yet?
I mean, I don't think you'll ever know. I mean, some things like, okay, you're making a product, and once you've made it and it's right, and you have like, you know, a stockpile of like inventory, and you want to sell the inventory, you're like, okay, now I'm ready to go. But like, it doesn't always work out that way. For me, it's just like, I think once I've made a product and I've used it, sometimes I've like had I literally have like hundreds of products that we've made and that I've had for years that I haven't launched yet, that I've been testing and I've been using, and they're just not right, or it's just not, the material is just like not perfect, or the way this thing works or that thing works is not right. But then there's a point where you're like, okay, cool, I can't improve this anymore. Like, let's go. Let's photograph it. Let's make a video. Let's put it out there. And sometimes it fails. Sometimes you don't sell anything. Other times you do extremely well, and it allows you to buy a laser cutter. It allows you to kind of get that Mark Forged 3D printing machine that I want to buy, but I just can't do it yet. I'm ready. So like things like that. It's just I don't know. For me, it's a gut feeling. It's just kind of like your inner compass or something. You know? You learn to like trust that after a while. You know, you probably did how many Kickstarter campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do learn to trust after a while. I think that the thing that I remember though is like, before you have that sense, the answer to that question is like when to launch it. Like before you're comfortable, like in the beginning, there's this like, it's beyond hesitation. Like I think when you're this far along in like creating beautiful products, you have like this sense and this like compass to it. But at the beginning I don't know what it was like for you when you like decided to do your grad show in like this really specific way, but I'm guessing it was kind of scary.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, and so like I think for me, when I remember when people ask me about like, we've done crazy things now in my business, and people are like, oh my gosh, like they point to something recent and they're like, that must have been so hard. And it's like posting our first Kickstarter campaign asking for $12,000 was harder because I didn't have any reputation. I didn't have anything to point to that I like was like, look, I'm this person who did X. Like there was none of that. I was just like, I'm Jessie from Detroit or whatever. Like it's like, so I just think that is really healthy to keep in mind too, is like it feels different at the beginning and it feels really uncomfortable. Like that's really normal, you know? So I think that's important as well.
Yeah, I think if you're just starting out, having a history of some sort of documentation of stuff you've been working on, like if you've joined a community, like be it ArtCenter or the Design Lab or a Hackerspace or these wood shops and metal shops that are out there in Los Angeles, that gives you a place and a reason to build things you can then take photos of and write about, and so then when you do a Kickstarter, people aren't just like, oh, Jessie from Detroit. It's like, oh, it's Jessie from Detroit who's done all these things, you know. That's one thing for me is I was pretty active in this open source electronics community for over 10 years, and so when I did a Kickstarter, I kind of had a built-in community of people who were at least tolerant of me, if not rooting for me, you know. It's like because I wasn't just this total nobody. I wasn't an unknown. They're like, oh, he's got a history of doing things, and maybe the things he does will work. And so it was a level of assurance. But if it's also something you really care about, like you've made hundreds of things, but some people might just have this one thing they're really passionate about. And if you're really passionate about it, there's probably like 1,000 people who will at least want it. and that's enough for a Kickstarter. You know?
But also I think these days launching a product, there is so much on the market. The market is so saturated that it's very difficult to establish when is the right time. Of course, it takes a lot of iteration in terms of like studies and prototyping and understanding details. And I think actually details, when the detail is done and it's ready and is the detail is actually what allow us to be really unique. Details in general, and what makes a product very special.
Yeah, so you know it's ready when the detail's right or feels exciting. Or
But it takes a lot of time to get there. I mean, especially in furniture, lighting or interiors, it takes a lot of time and a lot of tests of different types of different materials, different scales. But at the end, it's I believe it's when the detail feels like baked enough. I think that's good to let it out.
That's great. And I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then we'll open it out up to Q&A. So be stewing your questions. All right, so another question I have is, how did you guys fund your projects? If you feel comfortable sharing that, like, is it by having something, and having a client fund it before it's actually ready, or crowdfunding, or how did you get started, and how do you sustain?
I'll start with that. I've done every funding mechanism that exists. So that might be an exaggeration, but it also may not be. I have taken angel investment, which means like from an individual, for the Inkodai business. That was primarily bootstrapped with a small angel investment as well. Obviously, I did Kickstarters, 2 of them. I have grown my business through retail POs, meaning like go out and hustle like Urban Outfitters, get like $100,000 PO, use that to pay rent. I've factored POs, which means like getting the money early so you actually can pay your rent. And then going from there, I've now taken venture investment, so real deal venture capital, more for this packaging company, and also I've done small business loans and banking loans or just paid for stuff on credit cards. So that's my point, guys. I've done the things, and I think that if there's one interesting takeaway from trying it all, it is that there is I think there's way too much advice out there that says this is the way to fund a business, this is the way to do it, venture capital is the route, angel investment's the route, bootstrapping is the only way to go. In reality, it really is about finding a path that works for your business, makes you happy while you're doing it. Because if you're starting a business and you should be sort of miserable, but if you're completely miserable, maybe there's a problem. So I think that's what I've learned, is there's no one right way. It is about keeping yourself afloat while you pursue your ideas.
I had the opportunity a little bit more than halfway through my college education to I wanted to make a bag in one of my classes, and so my teacher said, hey, one of my friends from college who's older than you has a bag company, you should talk to him. So I called this guy, his name's Bobby Chang. He owned the company, and it was one of the founders of the company InCase. I don't know if you guys know that company. They make iPhone cases and all sorts of stuff. And I basically would talk to him for an hour, once a week, and he would give me a full hour. And he would basically kind of, he was my very first mentor. And as I was doing my process, I was hey, I really want to design a bag. I really what do I do? And he's buy a sewing machine and figure it out. I'm no, I'm a designer. I don't sew. I just want to design it and then have someone else do it. And he's well, if you don't take my advice, then I'm not gonna, spend more time talking to you on the phone. So I bought an industrial sewing machine. It came to my house. I had never sewn once in my entire life, and I didn't even know how to thread the thread through the bobbin. And long story short, I used YouTube and opened the manual, and within 2 days, I actually made my first product because I learned how to do it. But fast forward, I became really good friends with him. He's kind of an older brother figure, and he's hey, I'm going to China to oversee some of our production because they were manufacturing. At that time, it was like many years ago, they were doing like 30,000 bags a week. And I wanted to see that. So I paid for my ticket. He took care of all my living expenses out there. And I visited like 7 factories and saw every single part and piece of the process. And by the end of the trip, I was like, I don't ever want to come back here again. Like, this is not my vibe. This is too big for me. Like I can't even imagine this many units and volumes and all this stuff. And I was like, what I really want to do is like build my own workshop and build it in my backyard. And at the end, I never asked him for anything. I never asked him anything for free. And he's like, okay. I'm like, what? He's like, if you build it and you put together the plan, I'll fund you. And I didn't even ask for that. He just like believed in me. And so I came back to LA, put together like a keynote presentation of like all the machines I would need and the cutting tables I would need and some of the tools. And he's like, all right. He wrote me a check for like more money than I'd ever seen in my entire life. And I showed my parents and they like freaked out. And I knew inside that I could do it. And so I got a space in the Arts District in downtown LA when it was like 90 cents a square foot, and had a shitty factory, set it up, and I paid him back in full in 5 months. And he didn't take any interest or equity in the company or anything like that. Yeah. Well, thanks to him, because he helped, he's like, we did it this way, but maybe you shouldn't do it that way. Maybe you should do it differently. Maybe you should look at Porsche, and maybe you should look at Hermes, and maybe you should look at all these other companies who are doing things with more longevity and more like ownership of their own process. And so for me, that was kind of how, thank God, like that happened, or else I don't know where I'd be right now. But without having someone like that in my life, having someone like that in my life is truly special, truly like an angel investor.
That's really incredible. Like, I think the most incredible aspect of that story is how non-dogmatic he was, in the sense that he was like, do it your own way, you know? I mean, and that is like the thing to look for in a mentor as well, is like not someone just tell you about how they did it, but it's like, you are your own person. Like, the best mentor is going to tell you, is going to support how you want to do it.
No, you go.
All right.
I know.
My story is really tragic, so you go first.
Well, so mine is one of these potential Kickstarter terror stories you hear, where like we did this for the first Kickstarter for the original Blink one. It was 28,000, and I figured, okay, we'll get like some 1,000 or so backers, and that'll be about the cost it'll cost us, a little bit of overhead, maybe for even to make some money off of. And we ended up, was it quadrupling that? So it became like 120,000. So many more backers, and it's like, crap. Now we got to figure out how to actually make all these. And I knew how to make the electronics part, but I didn't know how to make the enclosure and the rest of the packaging. And so it was a big learning process. And thankfully, my little company had enough buffer money in the bank to kind of make us go through those months of figuring that process out. And even still, there was like some hand assembly of the first 1,000 units in my living room with a pizza party with a bunch of friends, which is not a sustainable way of doing assembly, but it helped us get through that first. And then like for the second one is kind of a similar story, but around 30,000, and then like up around 110,000 or something was what the Kickstarter ended up as. And that it makes it much nicer. But like, I didn't really have a good model of the costs of how much it would cost to actually make these things. I only had it for the parts that I knew very well. And so my one advice is like, try to figure out your costs. And if you don't know them very well, make a very fixed run. Like, I'm only going to make 100 of these, because I've seen some of my other friends who've done Kickstarters and they blow up and they only know how to make 100 of something. They don't know how to make 10,000 of something. And so what do you do? How do you make that shift? It's like, well, one way of avoiding that shift is doing it as a limited run. That's my story.
Yeah, that's actually what if I were a panelist, I guess I could weigh in more than I do. But whenever we were talking about when you're ready to launch, usually you've got to know your costs first. Like that would be my number one, pretty much. But yeah, that's a really good learning. So you funded almost totally through your Kickstarter campaign.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Fortunately, we already had a little corporate setup set up beforehand, so we'd have to go through learning how to make a company in addition to learning how to make a product.
Yeah.
So if that's on your table, try to do one before the other, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now on to the tragedy.
No, it's not tragic. I never got funding to do stuff. For me, funding is actually commission, so it's more like budget. Okay, so there is a client that says, "This is what I have to build this stuff," which is great actually, because it's always a challenge, and I think living on challenges is good these days. But on the other hand, partially because of us all being a designer, you know, you always want to evolve and do different stuff. So I've always used my salaries to fund my own prototypes. And then with the prototype, I go and approach different people and try to actually put it on the market.
Yeah.
So that is more like, obviously, again, like the budget is very, you know, it's what it is.
Yeah.
But it's always like an opportunity to actually make something new.
Yeah. That's kind of similar to what we see on Kickstarter, is a creator will have scrounged up some money, maybe from their salary from another job or something, and they'll build a prototype that's exciting enough for their community to get involved and fund them, like you would approach a client. Yeah, that's interesting.
So I don't do much commission work. What percentage of your commission is actually money, like salary for you? Like is it half or?
Well, it really depends from the project.
Yeah.
But obviously, when you know, it's usually divided in phases. So it's like a concept phase, and then a manufacturing phase, and then a delivery phase. So there is a percentage on each of these phases on, you know, my time basically. Which I tend to, because I'm really bad at asking money, so maybe we guys should have a talk at some point. But at the end of the day, for me, it's more like really finding the opportunity to deliver a product, because most times doing a lot of interiors, for me, doing an interior has always been an opportunity to do custom furniture. So sometimes the client didn't even ask me, I want a custom dining table, but I just show it to him or to her. And most times, like, I basically get the money to make it, and then to commercialize it, to marketing the table, for example. And then I have orders coming in, because the product is out and pictured and finished and tested, and so that's kind of like how I started the business into the custom furniture. And now it's mostly actually commissioned, but still.
Because one of the things I've seen a lot, and I'm guilty of it myself, is not factoring in money to pay yourself for these Kickstarter projects. It's like, oh, the cost of the materials is like, say, $5, and I'll sell it for, say, $20. And it's like, well, how much engineering time, how much design time, how much the time to set up the websites and whatever, you know, that's probably several tens of hours.
Shipping, you know, community management, all of those things. That's exactly what I was going to ask you is, you know, what's your breakdown?
It's still TBD.
Yeah.
I'm very bad at it, because what's the thing? So part of the thing is it's kind of a labor of love. And so, and like with open source, there's all this free work you do because you believe in the ideas. And so it's hard to put a price on some of that stuff, even though you should, because how are you going to eat? Yeah. So I don't know. I don't have a good model for it yet.
Yeah. And from my experience at Kickstarter, the Kickstarter community is different than, say, any community online, in that people aren't terribly price sensitive, because they're interested in seeing the idea flourish or being part of a movement. So yeah, please factor in your life. I think that's pretty good for the questions that I have, and I'd love to open it up if anybody wants to just raise your hand and go ahead.
Hi guys, I have a question. One moving to the point of the Lumi community. First question, it sounds like you guys a lot of X factor, and X factor is that you're fearless or you're willing to take on things and learn new things. How important do you think that's been to your success? And then the second question is, I was here at the first book 2 years ago. Thank you for hosting that. I was at a point in my career, I was happy to put it installed out. And since then, I've tried a bunch of personal projects. I've failed, and somehow I've managed to fail my way up. And I've run with them. But I was hoping you guys could talk about do something. And is there a way, maybe directly so that when you're 10 minutes, you want to fall on a spot, maybe I can fall more in the direction that I want to go? Is there, you guys crack that? You know, can you talk about that?
Okay, I'll attempt this. Okay. All right. So one on the X Factor thing, I think everyone has an X Factor and people are just like not letting that flag fly. Like I think that, so I think it's a misguided impression, like entrepreneurs are these like weird, or just creators or designers in general, like this unicorn creature. Everyone can do this stuff. It's usually, when you add it up, like the amount of time we've spent doing it, it's just a lot more time. So everyone just has to start investing that time if it's important to them. So I think that's a misguided impression. I think that there's another thing that I talk about. I don't know if this is like a sports crowd, but batting averages are kind of fascinating to me. So the thing that's fascinating about them addresses your second point about failure. Legendary, people who are in like the Hall of Fame for batting averages failed 7 out of 10 times they stepped up to the plate. That is entrepreneurship. It is the fact that you fail a little less than everyone else. So that is what it is. So just a mediocre batting average is someone stepping up to the plate and hitting it 2 times out of 10 instead of 3, or maybe nearly 4 times out of 10. That looks small math-wise, but that failing just a little bit less is the practice and is the passion and dedication you're putting into it. But that to me is really important to realize that I fail 7 out of 10 times. You have products that probably didn't work out the way you wanted. That, it just is par for the course. I'm just using all sorts of sports things now. But anyway, you get the idea. So I think that is really important to recognize.
Yeah, our culture doesn't seem to really want to document all the times we mess up. It's always like, oh, we talk about I'm a success, and it's like, yeah, everyone's got I've got 70 or 80 designs that I've never shown because they suck, or at least I don't think they're very good. They might actually 1 or 2 might be actually good, but you have crappy times.
One thing I've learned is that if you don't risk, you don't get. So risking is essential to move forward, and failure is part of it. And actually, it's almost better to fail at something because you learn a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, running a company is really hard. I went to design school. I'm like an artist. I play music. I don't want to work. You know what I mean? I want to play. But the reality is you have to put the time. If you want to see an idea come to life, you have to put so much more love into the things that you don't know. I was spending all day long learning about I'm going to Japan on Thursday. I'm doing a launch. Yeah, I'm doing a launch over there in Kyoto. I'm really excited about, but I have to take all this product with me and learning about customs and learning about all these different rules and regulations. And in order for me, I want to go to Japan really bad. I love Japan, but in order to get there without being taxed a ton of money in customs, I have to spend all day long going through these websites, clicking these links, filling out these forms, and I hate that. It's it's debilitating. It's the worst. It's ruined my day. But you have to put that time in order to make it so I can afford to go there and then meet new people and kind of continue to do what I'm doing. And then another part of it is just doing something you love. If you love what you do, then you'll get really good at it because you will go through all the parts of the process it takes to get there. I make music for fun with my friends, and this past year I said, okay, I'm gonna make music after work and just spend time doing that because it feels really good and it's amazing. And we made probably 80 tracks, right? All of them are bad. One of them we just made is probably the best thing I've ever made. I'm so excited about it. And none of you will ever hear this probably because this might not ever get released. But the fact that we did that and I'm excited about it, and that passion for that one song fuels me to get together with my friends 100 more times to try to experience that again. It's the same thing with sports. It's if you're playing table tennis or tennis and you serve it and you hit it perfectly that one time and you get it right, and like, and you ace or something, it's like, oh yeah, I did it. Okay, now I want to try to do that again, and it's kind of much harder to do that again without a lot of training, you know. And so I like the aspect of training. I like the aspect of, you know, sketching 100 sketches before that one is good. I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of like, practice.
I mean, you brought this up twice now, that the fact that you have to do things that you don't want to do, or you have to just learn it to do it. And like, I think that's really important. It's like, I think all these things that you think aren't really necessary, like, oh, I can just hire it. I can just hire this problem away. It's like, no, you have to still understand the problem. Even if you do hire somebody, I think you need to spend time to actually figure out, like, the terminology at least. Also, just like, what's the hard thing, what's the easy thing in that domain. So like, yeah, you know, if you want to work in wood, you know, take a wood shop. If you need to figure out logistics, you know, start shipping stuff, and then maybe hire a shipping company.
Yeah, and that we see that on Kickstarter too. Like, there are quite a few creators who have failed the first time that they come to Kickstarter, and people are so worried about failure. But then they come back for a second campaign. They know how Kickstarter works. They've been building a community for a little bit longer, and they hit it out of the park because maybe they listened to their community in the first failed campaign and iterated on their product. How many of you are hardware hacker people in here? Okay. Okay, the example I was going to use is Particle. But anyway, there are quite a few examples of creators that come back and hit it out of the park the second time. So, yeah. Any other questions? Maybe we'll take 2 more. Yeah?
So I guess there's like all these other associated risks that you guys don't have cost production. And I guess one risk that would be interested in hearing is when you start going into manufacturing, you build some kind of R&D and build some kind of money into it, and there's always a risk that someone else who is better, faster, stronger is take your product apart, and recreate it and resell that at a lower time and higher speed and to a better market, more resources. How do you reconcile that risk with some sort of contingency that wants to stay at the top of the mountain?
I mean, I manufacture every day. We have seen so many of our products being almost identically made, you know, and it's so frustrating and it sucks. It hurts your heart, you know. But I think, like, until we're a big funded company, we're a small privately owned company. You just have to expect that people who don't have integrity are going to be trying to make money off of ideas that you have. You know, this open source idea is amazing. I wish I had the love and desire for that. But if your amazing designs get copied all the time, you kind of feel a little bit less apt to just share everything. You know, for me, it's just, you know, you just have to do your own thing. You have to have your own DNA, and you have to be consistently being yourself, you know. And by doing that, I think you'll have a crowd of people who follow that, who understand the difference between real and copied, you know, or real and first and second, or I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but if you're going out there and putting yourself on the limb to make something that is original, just doing that is gonna fuel yourself enough, and you just can't worry about everyone else. You know, right. You got to just stop thinking about everyone else all the time. You got to focus on your own thing.
You're leaning on brand, right? Like, you're building this strong link between you and your community and what you guys genuinely get excited about, right? Yeah.
I think like, I don't have a real example of this for myself because my product is kind of niche enough that it hasn't engendered too many copies, and those that do don't really make a difference. But one of the things that I was really excited about that has been copied enough was this thing a couple years ago called the Glyph. I think it was this little iPhone camera holder, and all it was a simple injection molded piece of plastic with a threaded insert for mounted onto a tripod, and it got copied like while the Kickstarter was happening, I think. But they have this great community, and they have these awesome design sense, and so like they're like, yeah, whatever, but ours is better because we actually care about how it actually works.
The guys at Studio Neat.
Yeah. And then they just kind of kept going and made like a better version of the product that was more complex, and so they ended up making something that was less easy to be copied, but don't know, still. I don't really have any of that, but
and cannibalized their older
Yeah,
version.
yeah.
That they just kept pushing themselves. Yeah.
But I mean, the reason, one of the reasons why, one of the ways I found it is I found it on a 3D part repository. Like somebody had basically copied it and put it online, so I could then download it, print it on my 3D printer, which I did. It's like, oh look, I've got a free version of the glyph, and it didn't work very well. But you know.
Yeah, I think definitely, you know, brand and even like zooming out from brand, there's always this thing that you can do that is different or better in some way than someone else. Like that's why you're your own person. That's probably why you're working on your idea, right? And so I actually think like this is like both a hard and soft message. Like the hard message is if someone truly can rip you off in every way and be better, like then you should probably do something else. Like that's the hard part, right? Like because it just means they're like actually better in every way. Like but the yeah, but that's like but the good news, that was the hard part. I already told you that. Okay, the soft part is like that's probably not true. That's probably just how it feels to you. It probably feels like they're better in every way because they have more resources or whatever else. But in reality, they're not you. They don't have the soul you have. They don't have maybe the passion for the idea or the brand you're building in the community or a special, you know, thing about the way you want to develop that product. And so it's both like keep both things in check. And the other interesting thing is like everyone in business has their own objectives and kind of game they're playing. And this also might sound harsh, but I think it's interesting. Like whatever big company X you're thinking of that might rip you off, it's possible that like for them to make a dent in their sales, they would have to sell like, you know, 250,000 of said thing. But for you to make a transformative moment in your life, you might need to just sell 10,000 of that thing. So maybe they literally are not going to rip you off until you make it a lot more successful. Like, and that's not, it's again, both hard and soft message, but the soft part is like, don't let that nightmares deter you. They might not even be real, you know? So I think that's interesting to consider.
Again, DNA and detail, I think, what makes your product unique. I mean, these days is so much going on again, market super saturated, but at the end, if your detail and your DNA comes out of your product, whatever happens with it is still, I think, just stick to it. I mean, it's inevitable sometimes that people just like does the same thing or, so partially is about letting it go. And partially is about really caring about your product in every detail.
Yeah, be obsessed. Make spreadsheets. Yeah, I think we have time for one more, and then we'll get to mingling. Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize. It's a boring, dull question, so it revolves around numbers right now, but it's very much important. Particularly with those who are B2B, I think Tod has spoken about this. So it sounds like most of you guys do B2B, and also business to consumers as well. But market projections, whether it's for investors or for yourself, kind of figure out where your business will be next month. Mm-hmm. How do one project their market share when it comes to B2B? Mm-hmm. Any experiences or thoughts on that? And this goes up to anyone else who feels that.
I think, yeah, so I think there's probably a lot of answers to that question. I think that ultimately something that is really important is, you know, cracking open a spreadsheet about your idea as early as possible and doing real math around, as people have already described up here, the unit economics, meaning like, you know, if you're going to sell it for $10, how much does it really cost you all in? And the reason why, like, you almost want to have your fundamentals checked because there's no like projection forward if you can't make money off of it enough to sustain. I think that when it comes to B2B, like the thing that's interesting, I mean, we sell to businesses almost exclusively. We sell packaging. Businesses are just like consumers with a lot more people in the building. Like it's like they're not, everyone is people, right? So like when we sell boxes and someone needs like maybe 1 million boxes, like it sounds like this crazy thing, but it's still humans like making a choice, you know. And so you would analyze like it like any market. Like if you were selling jewelry and to a certain demographic of like women, you would be like, how many of these women exist? How many can I reach realistically? Same thing for me, selling B2B. Like I'm not selling jewelry to women, I'm selling boxes to e-commerce companies, but I go, how many of them are in LA? How many of them can I reach realistically each month? So the math usually comes down to something understandable. And I hope that's actually, I went to design school, as you know, like I don't have an MBA. The good news about business math is like, it's pretty logical. But the only thing you can do wrong is ignore it. Yeah.
What is that perceived or the speculated percentage of potential market that you might have? 10%, 5%? Is there something standard? Is it contributed to yours?
I'll just take that. I think that it comes across generally as kind of naive to look at an entire market. Like if I were to say, like packaging is like $400 billion in the US or whatever, I don't go like, Lumi's gonna have 1%. That would have me at a lot more revenue than I currently have, okay? If I would have 1% of the 400 billion number. So it would be weird to pitch it that way because it actually comes across, I think, generally as like, you are just talking about something you're talking about an abstraction. You're talking about how much the world is using a packaging and then you're just like, I'll go out and get that. I think a much more rational and like reasonable thing, especially if you're pitching to investors or someone who you're describing your business to, is to approach it from you out. Say like, I'm here in LA. Like that's why I just mentioned, like I'm here in LA. I'm really good at e-commerce packaging. There's 1,000 e-commerce companies in LA. They're averaging shipping, 15,000 shipments a month. If you assume they're spending 50 cents on packaging, like I'm just doing rough math. My point is like, I can be like, if I do this well, I can make X. And it stems outward from me and like rational deductions I'm making about what I could do. And that comes across as a lot more believable than me saying, I'm gonna get 1% of packaging. If I had 1% of packaging, I would be, it's like just a different world, right? So I think you wanna explain your concepts from you out.
Yeah, another way to sort of project is getting out there and selling something. If you get purchase orders or something like that, if you have a monthly amount that's coming into you, you can sort of project a little bit more closely to reality. Yeah, that's what a lot of people do at Kickstarter. They say, how many of these units can I sell in a 30-day period? Then what can we do after Kickstarter sort of thing. Yeah. Anything else to add to that? Yeah. All right. Okay, maybe one more. I think we have time. Anybody else have a burning question? One more? Oh, all right. We're gonna mingle, so you guys can ask whatever you want, one-on-one. All right, let's give them hands. All right, thank you guys. Get to mingling.